He crushed a crystal glass with his bare hands. Red wine dripped everywhere like blood. Why? Because another made man dared to disrespect me at dinner. He treated me like a ghost for 8 entire months. But tonight, the ruthless capo of Chicago bled for me in front of everyone.
Guys, look at this absolute masterclass in a mental snap. You and I have probably seen what happens when someone gets pushed past their limit. To truly get Ravenna, we need to watch the exact second she gives up on this toxic marriage. For 8 brutal months, she played the loyal wife to Santino Valeri, a boss who treats affection like a live grenade. When he hits her with the ultimate cold shoulder, she does not even cry. Instead, we see the birth of a terrifying villain era. She slips into a forbidden red dress, splashing bright danger into his totally sterile world. She becomes the exact ticking time bomb he was always paranoid about. Life lesson here, guys. True rebellion never screams or throws a tantrum. It simply opens its eyes and stares back with absolute, freezing clarity. The camera pans slowly across a dining room that is totally suffocating under all its expensive flexes. Before a person completely loses their mind, they try desperately to force some kind of order onto their surroundings. Just look at Ravenna obsessing over this massive table, spending 40 agonizing minutes lining up crystal glasses and folding heavy napkins into perfectly identical triangles. It is the frantic energy of a woman drowning in domestic misery. After 8 months of being a literal captive pretending to be a wife, her dinner setup has 0 romantic candles or fluffy flowers. It is just cold, hard, expensive plates. 2 heavy chairs sit miles apart at opposite ends of the room. Here is a free life lesson. Physical distance in a room is always a dead giveaway of the massive emotional wasteland between 2 people. This entire house is basically operating as a silent villain. The Valeri estate, sitting 40 minutes north of Chicago, is not a home. It is an isolation chamber. The giant floor plan is literally a weapon Santino designed so they never accidentally bump into each other. At first, Ravenna lied to herself, calling it an adjustment phase. Life lesson, people, never lie to yourself when a relationship feels suspiciously like pure fear. He sleeps in the freezing guest wing, tossing her the massive master bedroom like a scrap for a stray dog. When he completely ghosts the meal she cooked, she just stays glued to her seat. The silent maids drift around her like actual ghosts, making sure every single interaction is delayed, sterile, and totally stripped of any real human warmth. In the underworld of Mafia families, strict rules always replace actual affection. Ravenna sits paralyzed, her fingers twisting a wedding ring that digs into her skin. She takes the pain in total silence, perfectly mirroring her suffocating reality. Suddenly, car headlights slash through the dark room. The untouched dinner is freezing cold. Heavy boots echo down the hall, and Santino waves off his armed muscle with 2 sharp words. Watch how her spine snaps straight the second she hears him. That is not respect, guys. That is the hardwired flinch of prey spotting a predator. He fills the doorway, his dead eyes scanning the room for assassins, before he even bothers to look at his wife. The life lesson here is simple but brutal. Do not ever confuse pure fear with genuine respect. Over the last 8 months, the terror of the Valeri name had soaked right into her DNA. She saw literal hitmen drop their voices into nervous whispers whenever he walked past. The whole city was trained to fear his family. She only survived by turning a blind eye to the violence paying their bills. Here is a dark life lesson for you. Sometimes playing completely dumb is the only way to survive a living nightmare. Santino ran his criminal empire and his house with the exact same iron fist. Total, suffocating dominance. Standing right there in the dining room, his dark eyes drag over her perfectly set table. There is zero warmth on his face. He looks at her emotional effort, registers it as a fatal weakness, and just turns his back toward the stairs without dropping a single word. Absolute ice. Pure desperation will always make people do incredibly foolish things. Ravenna actually calls out to him, taking a fragile shot at clawing back just a tiny crumb of dignity. Santino stops on the dark stairs, completely frozen, but he refuses to give her the basic human decency of turning around. "I have work," he drops on her. 3 simple words delivered, like a heavy judge slamming a gavel. It is a massive slap in the face, stacking on top of every locked door she has dealt with for months. You can basically feel the sick knot of humiliation twisting in her gut. Big life lesson. The biggest mistake you can make is expecting a monster to suddenly grow a heart. Driven by that agonizing need to just be noticed, she forces her shaking legs up the dim stairs, he chasing the shadow of her own ruin. The door to his private office is heavy mahogany, built to crush the confidence of anyone standing outside. Ravenna totally breaks the unwritten rules of the mob and barges right in. Santino is dug in behind a massive desk, the harsh glow of a lamp cutting vicious shadows across his face. The pitch-black night pushes against the window behind him. He looks up, hitting her with a hollow stare designed to make her feel like a stranger in her own house. Her voice shakes, but she reminds him she is his wife, demanding his stupid paperwork wait while she bleeds out emotionally. Here is a life lesson. The real devil never needs to raise his voice. Santino uses absolute silence as his main weapon. He just takes a slow sip of his expensive whiskey, waiting for the dead quiet to crush her resolve. You and I need to appreciate the framing of this standoff. He fully expects her to fold under his toxic vibe and run back to her room, but she holds her ground. She steps deeper into the lion den, closing the gap until the air between them is sparking. Up close, his scent is intense, expensive cologne, sharp liquor, and the exhaustion of a guy who sleeps with one eye open. It takes all her remaining guts to reach her hand out. It is a tiny, desperate plea for connection. His reaction is lightning fast and violently cold. He dodges her touch like her fingers are coated in toxic waste. Her empty hand just hangs there in the freezing air. In a shattered whisper, she asks him why they are even doing this. Life lesson here. Never ever beg for a physical connection that someone flat out refuses to give you. She knows exactly what she is to this cartel. A living poker chip used to settle a massive debt. But even a pawn deserves to know the rules. Her voice totally cracks as she demands to know why he would buy a wife just to starve her soul. For a split second, his tough guy armor actually glitches. A muscle jumps in his jaw, the tiniest crack in his stone face before he locks it down. "Go to sleep," he growls, his voice vibrating with pure danger. But she stands her ground, so the monster finally leans in. The shadows swallow half his face like a true villain. He locks onto her with dead eyes and delivers the absolute fatal blow. He tells her, completely deadpan, that he never wanted her in his bed anyway. Life lesson. Physical pain heals, but freezing cold rejection can permanently destroy a person. A true boss-level villain never softens the punch. He twists the knife nice and slow just to watch the drama unfold. That nasty rejection hits her in the chest like a literal sniper round. You can see the hot tears welling up, the shaky breathing of someone 1 second away from a total mental breakdown. But right here, dangling over the edge, an incredible plot twist happens. That deep survival instinct finally kicks in. It hands her the most brutal life lesson of all. If you want to beat the devil, you absolutely cannot let him see you bleed. She figures out her tears are the exact prize he wants to win. So she chokes down the sob burning in her throat. She straightens her spine, locking all that agony deep inside, giving him zero satisfaction She just turns her back and walks right out the door. She floats down that dark hallway like a ghost. Her face is frozen into a flawless mask, even though her entire reality is burning to the ground inside her head. The heavy door of the master bedroom clicks shut, and the dead silence swallows her alive. She stands paralyzed. His cruel insult plays on a sick loop in her brain. But as the clock ticks, all that crushing humiliation starts to bubble. It gets hot. It turns radioactive. Her sadness straight up mutates into a blinding, savage desire for payback. Guys, this is the exact moment the victim evolves into the ultimate villain. She hits her knees, digging into the back of her closet to find a piece of fabric he banned months ago. Life lesson here. Rock bottom is never the end. It is just a launch pad for an absolutely legendary comeback. Stick with me here because this final visual is pure cinema. She holds up that forbidden red dress. She bought this back in her past life, when she still owned her own soul, way before some arrogant crime lord tried to control her breathing. Banning this dress was never about the color. It was a sick power play to delete her free will. Now, she slides that silk on like she is suiting up for war. She glares into the mirror, zipping it up with the cold swagger of a woman who finally realizes nobody is coming to save her. She pulls out a lipstick, the exact shade of fresh blood. Painting it on is not makeup. It is a literal war cry. She is leaving that room as a completely unhinged threat. Life lesson to end on. When the world refuses to be your hero, you have to become your own beautiful monster. Bro, we are starting off at absolute peak drama. The girl looking in the mirror right now is completely done crying over a guy who ignores her. We zoom right in on her eye, and you can literally see the switch flip. Her soul just went ice cold. It goes to show you guys, a neglected heart is way more lethal than an actual loaded gun. So she needs a partner in crime and calls up her ride or die Tavi. Tavi is just chillin', munching on some snacks, zero stress. But that piece completely vaporizes the second Ravina asks for the address to the arson Korvax gala. Bro, the silence on that call is deafening. Tavi literally chokes on her food. Even her most fearless bestie knows this is a straight-up death wish. Let us hit pause and look at this breaking point together. Tavi goes from shook to totally hyped, telling Ravenna she will meet her at Lincoln Park in 40 minutes. Then we get this insane shot of Ravenna slipping into a blood-red dress. You and I know this is not just an outfit change. This is a full-blown declaration of war after 8 brutal months of being treated like invisible garbage. She was basically a ghost in that penthouse. But now that screaming red silk is doing the talking. She flashes a wicked, haunting smile, and those eyes are bone dry. No more crying, just pure, terrifying boss energy. Here is the life lesson, guys. Sometimes the worst pain you go through transforms into your ultimate armor. She is fully weaponizing her own heartbreak right before our eyes. The mob boss husband, Santino Valerius, threw her away like literal trash. But tonight, he is going to find out what happens when you push someone to their absolute limit. The cab rolls up to the massive gates at Lincoln Park, tires crunching loud on the wet pavement. The streetlights are giving us major cinematic shadows. Tavi grabs Ravenna by the hand, basically giving her one last out to cancel the mission. But Tavi is already grinning, fully ready for the chaos. Ravenna is low-key panicking, her heart beating out of her chest in total fight or flight mode. But her voice does not shake at all when she steps out. It is a massive reminder that real courage is not about being fearless. It is about being terrified and doing it anyway. She absolutely refuses to be a prisoner anymore. Arson Korvax is flexing his power with this absurdly huge mansion that takes up the whole block. Golden light and heavy bass are spilling out onto the street. 2 massive dudes with guns are guarding the door. But Tavi works her magic and smooth talks them like a total pro. Inside, this ballroom is completely insane. The lights are super dim to hide all the shady Mafia faces in the crowd. Right away, Ravenna spots 3 guys who literally used to eat dinner at Santino's house. The look of pure, unfiltered shock on their faces is absolutely priceless. It teaches us a real quick lesson, guys. The people you totally ignore and sleep on usually end up having the power to completely wreck your life. The ignored wifey just walked in and instantly leveled up to the final boss of the room. Stick with me here, because we are about to watch the apex predator make his move. Arsen Korvax slides right up to her, the flashing, insanely fake smile that does not reach his dead eyes. He looks at people like they are just dollar signs and collateral damage. Ravenna only knew this dude as a scary rumor from her husband's secret late-night calls. But now, this walking red flag extends a hand and does a whole dramatic bow. He calls her Ravenna Valerius, acting like he is so surprised to see her. Bro, her comeback is legendary. She shakes his hand, looks him dead in the eye, and drops her maiden name, Ravenna Altieri. It shows that claiming your own identity is the ultimate power move for freedom. With that one single word, she just snapped the heavy chains holding her down. Dropping her maiden name is a massive flex of independence. Arsen just lets out this villainous laugh that slices right through the room's vibe. Tavi grips Ravenna's arm super hard, basically begging her to chill out and step back. But Ravenna was past the point of no return the minute she zipped up that red dress. The beat drops into a slow jam, and Arsen actually asks her to dance. Taking his hand right now is literally declaring World War III. Every Mafia goon in the place is staring at them. It proves a hard truth we all face. If you force someone to be invisible for way too long, they are going to snap and make some serious noise. They start dancing under the lights, but Arsen keeps his distance. He knows pulling her close would trigger an absolute bloodbath right there. Ravenna can totally feel 100 haters judging her, but she keeps that gorgeous smile locked in. When you are surrounded by absolute wolves, confidence is your only shield. But then, the whole vibe of the party just shatters. Tavi whispers this panicked warning, and the music fades out in Ravenna's head. The energy in the room completely flatlines, bro. It is like everyone just smelled a monster entering the chat. We pan over to the front door, and boom! Santino is standing there, right behind him, with his huge bodyguard right behind him. He is giving off Major King conquering enemy territory energy. It is a harsh reminder that our deepest wounds always hit closest to home. He does not even care about the rival Mafia guns pointed at him. He is only staring at his runaway wife. We get to watch Santino's brain short-circuit as he takes in the scene. The crazy red dress, the bold makeup, his worst enemy with a hand on his wifey's waist. You and I can pinpoint the exact millisecond his cool guy act gets vaporized. His jaw is clenched so hard it might break. His fist is balled up tight. All that big brain Mafia logic is gone, replaced by pure unhinged fury. And Ravenna? She drops an absolute nuke of psychological warfare. She looks right into her husband's furious eyes, lifts her hand and literally blows him a kiss. The whole room stops breathing. It is a crazy lesson that letting anger drive the car will always drive you right off a cliff. Arsen is just smirking now. The king took the bait, and Santino starts stomping forward like a horror movie villain. Look at the absolute terror this guy commands just by walking. Santino is not even running. He is just taking these heavy, menacing steps, and the crowd literally parts like the sea to get out of his way. He gets to Ravenna and just clamps his hand onto her wrist like a steel trap. Arsen tries to play the hero and steps up to defend his dance partner. But Santino just hits him with this completely dead, psycho stare. It is wild, guys, and it teaches us that sometimes the biggest flex of authority happens without saying a single word. Arson actually the loss in front of everyone, totally taking the loss in front of everyone. Ravina gets dragged right out the side door into the freezing cold night. He tosses her into the back of this massive armored truck and slams the door so hard the whole car shakes. The driver floors it, and the tires rip up the street as they peel out. Inside that bulletproof truck, the silence is literally suffocating. Ravina is staring straight ahead, barely breathing, waiting for the massive explosion she knows is coming. Right next to her, the big bad Mafia king is just glaring out the window. His jaw is so tight, you can see a vein popping. The hand he just used to grab her is shaking on his leg from holding back his rage. Without even looking at her, he asks if she has completely lost her mind. He is trying to sound all cool and frosty, but you can totally hear the raw panic cracking his voice. It is a crazy lesson, bro. Trying to control everything usually ends up being the exact thing that destroys you. He is drowning in straight-up fear and furious panic. She calmly claps back that she lost her mind about 8 months ago when he stopped caring. That brutal dose of truth hits him so hard he physically snaps his head to look at her. The eye contact inside that dark car is basically lethal. She can feel the heat of his anger and smell his expensive cologne filling the space. When he finally spits out Arson's name, it sounds like he is ordering a hit. He is completely losing his mind over the fact that she picked his worst enemy. But she absolutely wrecks his ego with zero emotion. She tells him the guy did not matter at all. She just picked the one thing that would hurt Santino the most. It proves that the deepest cuts do not need a knife, just the blunt truth. She is literally watching this powerful mob boss on the edge of a total breakdown. The long drive back to the Mafia compound is pure torture. It is a serious test of who is going to crack first. Sitting in the dark, Santino is breathing heavy like a wounded animal. Ravina can still feel where he grabbed her wrist, burning like a branding iron. The absolute second they pull up, the quiet explodes. He ditches her right at the front door and starts stomping through the massive stone hallway. Ravina just takes her time following him. We get this super tragic shot of an untouched anniversary dinner sitting on the table, basically a tombstone for a marriage that starved. Remember, guys, neglecting what you have is the fastest way to lose it entirely. She walks into the huge library, and he is just leaning against a shelf, trying so hard not to completely shatter in front of her. All right, you and I need to unpack this absolute powder keg. The library feels like a dark containment zone. Reeking of old paper, Luca steps in, pushing the heavy door shut. That single sharp click, it makes her mob boss husband's spine snap entirely straight. He goes full interrogator mode, brutally listing every rule she broke. The enemy territory, the kiss. But does she apologize? Absolutely not. She completely shuts him down, simply pointing out that the king finally bothered to notice her red dress. Boom. That one sentence totally obliterates his untouchable Mafia boss mask. His pupils blow wide open, his jaw visibly trembling. It leaves us with a heavy lesson, guys. When we finally strip away our towering ego, absolute emotional surrender is a profoundly terrifying thing to witness in real time. Look closely at how this showdown is framed. Luca pulls off the ultimate survival tactic, utterly refusing to back up. She holds her ground, broadcasting that she sees right through his toxic control games. Santino violently pushes forward, eating up the space until the room feels entirely devoid of oxygen. That suffocating cedar scent of his wraps around her like a drug. She can actually see the frantic pulse going crazy against his throat. The tension becomes a crushing weight on her ribs. It hits us with a deeply tragic truth we all learn eventually. We so often sprint straight back into the fires that burn us, mistaking the deep ache of trauma for the pull of. She fiercely craves his dangerous touch and absolutely despises herself for that very weakness. Step into the shadows and watch what this monster pace inside his cage. Santino raises his hand, his fingers stopping exactly 1 inch from her trembling cheek in a wildly terrifying flex of restraint. Luca stands frozen in that iconic red dress, a brilliant visual metaphor for the danger trapping her. Her brain works overtime, trying to twist his unhinged rage into some warped protection. She literally thinks she caught a massive win because he broke first. But here is the hard truth we must face. We will completely invent tiny, fake victories just to survive our most crushing defeats. The heavy door clicks shut, leaving her entirely alone. She falsely thinks she holds the cards, totally blind to the fact that his exit was a calculated pause, not a white flag of surrender. The scene cuts to morning light, but the psychological darkness is still suffocating. Luca drags herself downstairs, desperately trying to build an emotional wall. She just wants the fake comfort of a normal routine. But the millisecond she enters the kitchen, the vibe absolutely nosedives. Santino leans against the marble counter, projecting the dark dominance of a Mafia king. He entirely refuses to look at her, save for the slow, brutal clenching of his jaw. Luca catches that micro-expression instantly. It teaches us a brutal lesson about trauma. Extreme fear forces us to memorize tiny details we should never have to notice. True safety is found in calm waters, not in becoming an expert at predicting a hurricane. She is entirely fluent in his terrifying language of silence. Luca approaches the counter, pouring dark coffee, just to give her shaking hands a physical job to do. For 8 straight months, the silence in this mansion felt hollow, like 2 ghosts missing each other in the dark. But today the vibe is completely different. The silence crushes her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. She sits across from him, staring at her mug, using the steam to avoid losing her mind. Then the power dynamic aggressively flips. Santino slaps his phone face down against the cold marble. He slowly lifts his gaze and absolutely locks eyes with her. It is intensely terrifying. Sometimes the absolute biggest danger in life comes not from being totally ignored, but from finally getting noticed by the exact wrong person. The apex predator has officially acknowledged his captive. He stares her down with agonizing slowness, feeding off the crushing psychological weight of his gaze. Luca feels those dark eyes, scanning her messy hair, her exhausted face, and the way she strangles that mug like a shield. For a guy like Santino, simply looking at her is a massive act of dominance. It completely shreds her armor. When he asks if she got any sleep, the sudden sound makes her jump. His tone is crazy soft, which makes it infinitely more terrifying. She mumbles a timid response and asks about his night. Does he answer? Absolutely not. He just takes a slow sip of coffee, totally weaponizing the dead air. It reminds us of a deeply bitter truth. Deliberate silence is often the absolute sharpest blade someone can use to completely cut you down. He stands tall, demanding total obedience. That marble island is a physical wall, but the real fortress is everything they refuse to talk about. Stick with me, because you and I can see exactly how insanely toxic this is. Neither brings up that scandalous red dress or the unhinged tension from the library. By starving her of closure, Santino traps Luca inside her spiraling mind, letting her anxiety do his emotional violence for him. He casually adjusts his cuffs and walks out the door. It forces us to swallow a devastating truth. The things people consciously withhold often wreck us way harder than the insults they scream out loud. Luca stays frozen, completely drowning in his calculated absence. Then, the camera whips over to the gritty streets of Chicago, where a menacing black sedan rolls into a dark alley outside a hidden mob club. This exclusive restaurant is basically a high-stakes war zone disguised by crisp tablecloths and expensive wine. Santino steps into the freezing night and pulls off a move totally out of character. He opens Luca's door himself. She visibly flinches, freezing in the shadows before reluctantly handing over her fingers. His skin feels like absolute ice. There is zero affection in the way his knuckles lock down around her hand. It is a territorial warning to every predator inside. He is announcing to the underworld that she is his new chess piece. She feels the hollow emptiness of his grip, but walks beside him anyway. It exposes a seriously tragic truth. Sometimes our fear of standing alone is so massive that we will willingly hold the hand of the exact monster who ruined our lives. The vibe inside this private dining room is suffocating, choked with cigar smoke and unhinged danger. 6 brutal men circle the table like sharks. These are elite criminals who calculate human value by the price of a targeted hit. Santino guides Luca to his right hand, pressing his palm into her shoulder to establish absolute ownership. Check out how fast her body language shifts. Her survival instincts snatch the wheel. She slaps on the hollow mask of the silent, obedient wife, dishing out empty responses to their terrifying questions. We learn a dark lesson about human preservation here. When you find yourself trapped in a room full of starving wolves, the absolute smartest strategy is to smile and pretend you cannot see the fresh blood dripping from their terrifying teeth. For 40 agonizing minutes, Luca plays her role perfectly. Then, this scarred boss across the table decides to poke the bear. He flashes a sickening smile, cracking a filthy joke about how well Santino polishes his property. An ugly chuckle ripples across the table. It is the worst sound, dangerous men bonding over disrespect. Luca instantly feels burning heat flood her cheeks. The desperate instinct to reclaim her dignity rises violently in her throat. But before she can part her lips to fight back, Santino slices through the tension. It shows us how deeply fake protection can wound. Pride is fragile, but having your voice erased by the guy claiming to protect you is the ultimate violation. Let us be honest. He silences the table strictly to defend his own massive ego, never her honor. The camera slows down for this cinematic beat. You and I have to appreciate how cold this is. Santino never yells, nor does his icy face twitch. He simply wraps his fingers around his crystal glass and slowly squeezes until it violently shatters into his bare palm. Dark crimson wine splashes across the white linen, perfectly mirroring fresh blood. Every single mobster in that room forgets how to breathe. He drops the jagged shards and speaks in a dead whisper, commanding the boss to never disrespect his property again. It highlights a deeply tragic life lesson. Toxic individuals will fight fiercely for you, not because they demand absolute ownership of your heart, but because they demand absolute ownership of your life. He is not saving her. He is fiercely guarding his prized trophy. The older boss turns pale, dropping his gaze in total submission. The brutal hierarchy is restored in seconds, but we must analyze Luca's reaction. For days, her traumatized mind endlessly loops that violent act. She fixates on the red wine staining his palm, and her broken psychology twists the narrative. She actually convinces herself he was willing to bleed to keep her safe. It proves how desperately the human spirit searches for light. We will paint our worst nightmares in beautiful colors just to survive sleeping through them. This romanticized delusion becomes the thickest chain holding her down. Then, the sterile silence of her cage is shattered. Her chaotic best friend, Tavi, practically kicks the massive front door wide open, dragging real life back into that cold, dead house. Picture this: Tavi comes crashing in like a total hurricane, slamming takeout bags down and roasting Luca for not being able to make a basic choice. She's low-key exposing how this toxic captivity has totally wrecked Luca's mind. But for the first time in literal months, Luca actually laughs. You can feel the suffocating vibes of that Mafia estate crack for a second. But look, you and I both know the deal. Freedom ain't ever handed over that easily. Right on cue, Beck, this absolute unit of a security boss, slides out of the shadows. He crosses his arms, glaring at Tavi like a pissed-off warden watching a bird in his yard. Lesson here, guys. Always cherish your rare moments of happiness, because the dark is always waiting around the corner. The second Beck opens his mouth, the room's vibe drops 10 degrees. He ignores Tavi as a human being and treats her like a straight-up glitch in the system. But Tavi isn't backing down. She claps back with absolute venom, asking if the dude needs to plug into a charger, straight up calling him a heartless robot. The tension is insane. Beck doesn't even blink, holding her gaze with these completely dead eyes before monotonously dropping his sleep schedule and fading into the dark. But catch this crazy detail. In that heavy silence, Luca spots a tiny muscle twitch in his jaw. No matter how deep you bury your feelings under a tough exterior, your true humanity is always going to leak out, eventually. Let's unpack this crazy moment, shall we? Tavi totally spins this cyborg's exit into a dark joke, saying a 12-second chat with him is basically getting married. Luca lets out a real, genuine laugh, and for one tiny second, the brutal reality of being a captive Mafia bride just vanishes. But, guys, isolation always strikes back. Hours later, the house is dead quiet, and Luca secretly hits up her brother, Lazzaro. He's surviving off the grid, living on ghost money her Mafia captor hasn't tracked down yet. Lazzaro is literally her only lifeline right now. It really hits hard when you think about it. Sometimes, in this crazy world, holding on to just one hidden thread of hope is the absolute only thing keeping your mind from completely shattering. Boom, the scene shifts, and we get slammed with her tragic backstory. After their mom died, Luca became an absolute shield for her brother Rav. She built this massive wall of lies to act like the mob violence wasn't fazing her. When Rav's voice pops on the phone asking if she's okay, his pure worry hits her like a literal freight train. She just savagely cuts the call short. It sounds cold, but she has to. She can't risk these lethal mobsters finding her 19-year-old bro. Across the room, Tavi is watching her, totally recognizing that shared trauma vibe, and quietly asks if he's safe. Luca just swallows hard and nods. Listen, sometimes the absolute strongest thing a person can do is lock their deepest pain behind a stone-cold mask just to survive another day. Sliding that phone away, she completely buries the insane stress of her brother's survival down deep. The days just blur together until this super suffocating, heavy silence takes over the mansion. It's that creepy middle-of-the-night quiet where all you hear is a ticking clock driving you mad. Thanks to her trauma, insomnia is kicking her butt, forcing her out of bed just to get some water and chill her racing heart. The whole first floor is pitch black because Santino, the boss, hates the lights on while he plots. The only thing you can see is this one wicked yellow sliver of light creeping from under his heavy study door. It's a brutal reminder of how life works. Your mind will never let you truly rest when you're stuck in pure survival mode. You and I have both felt that icy grip of pure terror in the dark, right? She creeps toward the study, feet freezing on the floorboards. The door is cracked just enough to hear Santino's dark, boss-level voice leaking out. Every instinct is screaming at her to run. After 8 months trapped in this Mafia empire, she knows you do not mess with his bloody underworld business. But bro, Her curiosity is just too strong. She glues herself to the cold wall, barely breathing. And get this, there's no yelling inside. The crazy long pauses mean he's dead silent, just listening to someone on the phone. Take it from this scene. Fear can either totally paralyze you, or it can force you to wake up and pay close attention to the danger right in front of you. The silence coming from that phone speaker is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The camera zooms in tight, and Santino just drops a single name twice. Silas. His voice shifts into this terrifying, demonic tone, packing so much heavy dread into that one word. Luca is completely clueless. She has no idea who Silas is or why Santino sounds so full of pure, toxic rage. But here's the crazy psychology of being a captive. Trauma turns you into a total info sponge. Her survival instincts kick into high gear, forcing her brain to engrave that name into her memory just as a loud click echoes from the mahogany desk. It's a harsh truth about navigating a toxic environment. Sometimes gathering dangerous knowledge is your absolute best weapon for making it out alive. She takes a panicked step back, desperate to vanish, but boom, her shoulder slams right into a solid chest. Santino is standing literally right behind her. Bro, there was zero warning. No creaking, no heavy footsteps. The dude just spawned out of the shadows like a literal ghost, knocking the wind straight out of her. His super deep voice rumbles from the dark, sending shivers down her spine as he asks what she's doing. She barely manages to stutter out a fake excuse about getting water, which is honestly wild since her heart is beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. She absolutely refuses to turn around while his cologne takes up all the oxygen. It's a wild life lesson here, folks. The absolute scariest monsters in our lives are often standing right behind us. The vibe between them gets insanely thick, totally charged up like a movie scene right before an explosion. Moving super slow, he reaches out and wraps his fingers around her wrist. But get this, he's barely using any pressure. It's not a trap, it's a total psychological mind game to check her pulse. His hand feels like a literal branding iron on her skin. The touch only lasts for 1 second, but it sends a massive jolt of electricity up her arm. It confirms her biggest fear. He totally feels that crazy, dangerous chemistry between them too. Without saying a word, he lets go and fades back into the dark hallway. She is left absolutely frozen. It really shows you that sometimes the quietest, tiniest moments in life hold the most absolute power over our destiny. Now she's got 2 dangerous secrets burning in her brain, so you know she's not sleeping anytime soon. Fast forward to the end of the week, and this massive storm completely wrecks Chicago. The wind is howling, smashing rain against the huge glass windows of the mansion. Luca is sitting there super stiff, staring blankly at a book she hasn't actually read a word of. Suddenly, you hear the heavy metal security gates grinding open down below. In this mob world, late-night moves are just standard business. Santino and Beck operate strictly in the shadows, and she's learned the hard way never to ask where they're off to. It's a crazy life lesson about power. Toxic people will always hide the truth to keep you completely in the dark and totally under their control. Follow me here, because this is where it gets crazy. Before Santino even left, every single part of his body language screamed that absolute violence was about to go down. Luca saw him walk out with Beck, noticing his violently clenched jaw and stiff shoulders. The dude literally looked like a predator walking straight into a bloodbath. As the midnight storm keeps raging, time just drags on forever. She's tossing and turning, totally refusing to admit she's staying awake for him. Caring about a toxic monster is a massive mistake, and it's a tough life lesson most of us learn way too late in the game. It's an emotional weakness she just cannot afford right now. But then, At exactly 11, the perimeter alarm starts screaming over the storm, totally freezing the blood in her veins. Absolute chaos instantly rips through the mansion. You hear tires screeching on the wet driveway, car doors slamming hard, and hardened Mafia guys screaming in panic. Pure dread hits Luca like a bucket of ice water. She ditches the blankets, running barefoot down the marble steps. When she hits the garage, it's a total disaster. Beck is barely holding up Santino's massive body. The boss is dragging his leg, clutching his ribs, and dark blood is pouring out, wrecking his white shirt. Luca's stomach drops to the floor. But instead of freaking out, she locks it in. Guys, we are entirely defined by how we act when everything hits the fan. She buries her terror right there, throwing on a face of absolute, unbreakable glass. Look, guys, you have to stick with me here because this is the exact second the entire power dynamic flips. Beck tries to play it cool, brushing off this horror show as a scratch. Meanwhile, our big Mafia boss Santino is sweating, trying to keep up his untouchable king energy, but his shaking voice gives him away. Then Luca nukes his ego by pointing out the pool of blood on the concrete. Without thinking, Beck dives in, throwing her shoulder under his good arm. You can see the pure shock on Santino's face. This lone wolf has literally never had anyone try to save him. It goes to show that a little genuine passion hits way harder than Vahir help. And as they drag themselves up those stairs, their fates are locked together. Their fates are permanently locked together. The camera zooms right into this claustrophobic washroom, locking on to the red stain soaking through Beck's clothes. She moves like a total zombie, dragging this wounded mob boss over to the edge of the bathtub. Boom! The heavy door clicks shut, and the lock snaps into place. Under those harsh, fluorescent lights, they both look hollowed out, and the dead silence makes the tension skyrocket. Beck grabs a medical kit she obsessively packed months ago. It is wild how she tries to build a tiny, safe zone when her life has been totally hijacked. You and I can probably relate to that, honestly. When the world around you is going up in flames, clinging to small, predictable routines is often the exact thing you need to survive the absolute chaos without losing your mind completely. So the bullet only grazed his shoulder, leaving a gnarly cut across the muscle. You can literally see the tension drop out of Beck's shoulders here. She tries so hard to keep up an ice-cold front, but her relief totally gives her away. She drenches a cotton pad in antiseptic and whispers that it will sting. Santino does not even blink. He stares at the wall, flexing his jaw, and drops that classic tough guy line about surviving way worse. Total toxic ego, bro. Beck completely ignores his flexing. Her hands move like an absolute machine, proving she had to learn how to patch up dangerous men way too early in her life. It is a harsh reality, but sometimes, in order to fix the broken people skull standing right in front of us, we have to numb our own deep pain first just to survive the night. You know that crazy heavy silence that feels like it could crush you? That is exactly what is happening in this washroom. Neither of them makes a peep. Santino sits there, completely stone-faced, acting like his ripped-up shoulder belongs to some other guy. Beck is fully in the zone, patching up his skin with the precision of a total pro. Then she pivots to the sink, frantically scrubbing the blood off her shaking hands. It is such a strong visual, almost like she is trying to wash the Mafia violence right out of her life. She checks the mirror, her eyes darting over the insane scars on his chest, and whispers that the bleeding has stopped. He is going to make it. But here is the real takeaway, guys. Just because you survive a total nightmare does not mean you have actually escaped the monsters chasing you. The camera totally locks onto Santino's dark, unreadable eyes here. Guys raised in his underground world do not do gratitude. So when he actually sees debts that need paying, So when he actually forces out a thank you, it sounds like he is choking on glass. Beck reaches down on pure instinct to grab his heavy jacket off the cold floor, and boom, plot twist, a single crumpled piece of paper slips right out of the pocket. It falls in slow motion, revealing a super sketchy note signed with just one letter, the letter S. This is that massive turning point where everything hits the fan. It is a crazy fun. It is a crazy lesson for all of us. The huge secrets we hide to keep ourselves safe? Yeah, those are usually the exact things that end up blowing up in our faces and destroying any peace we had left. Look at this note, guys. 3 massive clues are scribbled there. A motto. You can literally watch the color completely vanish from Beck's face as her brain connects the dots. She remembers Santino dropping the name Silas Amato just the other day. Boom! The traitor is officially exposed. Santino sits there on the tub, watching her absolutely freeze up. He is like a wounded wolf, scoping out his prey, waiting to see if she makes a move. Right now, Beck holds all the cards. She could totally let this Mafia boss walk right into a deadly trap. Or she could bail him out. It absolutely proves that real power has nothing to do with muscles or guns. True power is all about the crazy, heavy choices we make in the dead of night when absolutely nobody else is watching us. Her survival instincts are screaming at her to stuff that paper away and use it as leverage against this menace. But being completely isolated messes with your head, right? It makes us weirdly loyal to the people keeping us trapped. So, in a massive shocker, Beck walks right up and hands the traitor's note to the boss who ruined her life. Santino grabs it, his eyes going ice cold as he scans her face. He asks where she found it and if she read it, but let us be real. Those are not questions. They are straight-up traps from a master manipulator. But Beck? She does not even blink. She stares him down like an absolute legend. She teaches us a huge lesson here. Sometimes, stepping up and staring your worst fear directly in the face is the only way to completely break its hold over you forever. Let us unpack this insane moment together, you and I. Beck literally drops the name Silas out loud, and her voice is terrifyingly calm. Just watch the boss's face completely shatter. For 3 whole seconds, Santino actually forgets how to breathe. His jaw clenches so hard, you can see the deep betrayal hitting him like a freight train. Then he lets out this heavy sigh, admitting his own guy set up the whole bloody ambush. When Beck steps right up to his face and demands to know what happens next, the entire vibe of the room flips. The way he looks at her now is wild. It is pure respect. Life really does strip away all our fake masks eventually, right? Because for the very first time in this entire crazy story, he is not looking at a hostage anymore. He is looking at an absolute equal. Beck has totally crossed the point of no return here, dragging herself right into his Mafia crosshairs. Santino whispers that tomorrow he will take care of it, and his voice is so deadpan it gives me chills. It is a literal death sentence for Silas, dropped as casually as ordering coffee. Outside, this massive thunderstorm is wrecking the city, totally matching the absolute chaos in their heads. Santino drags his bleeding body up, kicks the door open, and just walks right into the freezing rain. He clearly needs that freezing shock just to feel alive after that betrayal. Honestly, sometimes we all run straight into the storm just to shut up the loud in our own minds. And Beck? She is so tied to this broken guy now that she blindly follows him right out into the screaming night. This freezing rain is instantly soaking them, mixing right in with Santino's blood, but Beck does not even flinch. Over the crazy wind, he asks her the million-dollar question. He knows she could have used that note to totally destroy his empire. Why hand it over? The question is just hanging there. Beck is mentally scrambling trying to convince herself she is just a good girl doing the moral thing. But there is a way darker truth happening here, one we all have to face. When someone is completely starved for human connection, they will literally drink poison if you hand it to them in a warm cup. It is insane, but we will give up our own freedom just to feel connected to someone else's drama. That is the wild, heartbreaking reality of being human, guys. Because I live in this house, she finally fires back, her teeth literally chattering. With that one absolute mic drop sentence, the whole captor-captive dynamic is totally nuked. Santino leans right through the pouring rain and just presses his forehead against hers. Notice how the shot just holds there? This is not some cheesy romance scene, bro. This is two heavily traumatized people crashing together to survive the storm. He whispers that he has no idea what to do with her. Think about that. The most dangerous boss in the city is totally lost. It just goes to show that all the power and control in the world cannot protect you from your own messy feelings. Coming from a guy who runs the streets, that is a massive confession of pure, terrifying vulnerability. You can bet her heart is beating out of her chest right now, but she stays completely glued to him. She shuts her eyes and lets the freezing rain pour over them, anchoring her entire life to this mob boss. She whispers at him to just take it slowly. It is such a wild flex, pretending she has any actual control over this absolute monster. But honestly, we all tell ourselves those little lies just to feel a fake sense of power when our lives are spiraling out of control, do we not? Santino stays right there for one agonizing second before pulling away, totally ripping that crazy magnetic connection. He vanishes right back into the shadows, leaving Beck standing alone in the dark storm. The reality finally hits her hard. The old rules are fully dead, and there is zero turning back now. Look, guys, no piece of paper will ever stop the absolute chokehold of a trauma bond. Once it sinks its teeth into you, all night the storm is thrashing against the windows, and our girl Beck is wide awake. She stares at the ceiling, her chest tied up in this crazy knot of sheer panic and weird craving. Morning rolls around, she drags herself into the dining room, and boom, she freezes. For 8 straight months, the Don Santino built a massive fort of case files and newspapers across the table. But today, the wood is completely empty. Here is a little life lesson for you. You never really get close to someone until you drop the daily distractions and face them. Every single barrier is gone. He is at the far end, totally motionless, tracking her every move with this insane, burning gaze. So Beck creeps through this painfully quiet room, pouring her black coffee exactly like she has 100th time already. She is completely tensed up, basically waiting for a bomb to go off. But instead, the boss shatters the silence with a total curveball. He admits he was cruel to her. His voice is this deep, dangerous rumble. He will not even look her in the eye, just spinning his mug with those scarred hands. Let us pause and take this in together. A mafia kingpin who built his whole empire on fear is suddenly spilling his guts to his captive. Beck just grips her cup, shutting her eyes as the apology hits her. It honestly teaches us a tough life lesson. Sometimes the absolute deadliest weapon a toxic person can pull on you is just a sudden, perfectly timed flash of vulnerability. Picture the camera zooming right in on her face, showing the absolute mental gymnastics happening behind her eyes. A broken part of her wants to snatch up this tiny crumb of validation and fix their messed up bond. But 8 months of total ice has turned her heart into pure steel. She is not letting one little speech wipe away the damage. She looks right at him and flat out says he caused her severe psychological trauma. Ringing through the room. She lists out every single horrible thing he did, from the lonely dinners to treating her like a ghost. He finally looks up. Guys, this leaves us with a real-life lesson. Sometimes your most untouchable, savage level of strength only kicks in after you have had absolutely everything ripped away from you. Check out the insane tension in the boss right now. Just look at that muscle twitching in his jaw. You and I are basically watching a cornered tiger trying to build a wall to block out his own feelings. But then an absolute shocker happens. He actually forces himself to sit there and take the hit. He lets her brutal words sink in without fighting back. She stands her ground, making it clear that a quick sorry is not magically fixing the nightmare he caused. She wants time. We are talking brutal, agonizing amounts of time. Let us take a crucial life lesson from this tense room. Real healing does not kick off with some lazy, half-baked apology. It requires both sides to sit down and chew on the painful, ugly truth until things actually change. He just looks at her and says he registers her input. The words hit the floor like concrete blocks. There is no massive speech, no fake promises about him suddenly being a good guy. But to a girl who has been treated like a shadow for months, even this basic drop of respect feels like a rush. They finish their coffee in this insanely tense quiet. Of course, peace never lasts. By 2 in the afternoon, their whole reality gets flipped upside down. The heavy rumble of armored trucks starts shaking the windows as armed hitmen absolutely flood the compound, ready to drop bodies. It hits us with a harsh life lesson. No matter how deep you bury your head in the sand, the dark consequences of your past are eventually going to kick your front door wide open. So they frame her totally alone at the top of these massive stairs, swallowed by the dark. Meanwhile, straight down below her, the crime bosses are packing into a grimy basement. It is literally hell bubbling under this fancy mansion. The only thing separating her fake safe zone from their bloody mob business is one heavy steel door. A massive enforcer is guarding the hall like a literal gargoyle. Left out, she sits on the freezing steps, completely ghosted in her own house. She can hear these aggressive voices leaking up through the floor. She cannot catch the exact words, but she feels the terrifying shift in their tone. It brings up a brutal life lesson. Trauma literally wires your brain to feel the hurricane coming just from a tiny drop in pressure. The tension kicks off with the Don talking from the cellar in this smooth, freezing voice. It is that terrifying chill of a guy who can snap his fingers and end you. His 52-year-old right-hand man replies with a dead, empty tone. But then, absolute chaos breaks loose. Shouts explode out of nowhere, pure rage, crashing through the floorboards. The heavy basement door finally rips open with an awful screech. The enforcer steps out first, casting a massive shadow. Right behind him is Silas Amato. The camera catches every drop of sweat pouring down his ghost-white face. His eyes are going crazy with the panic of a guy who knows he is completely cooked. It leaves us with a heavy life lesson. True guilt crushes your soul and body long before the punishment actually hits you. You and I have to pause and take in how wild this moment is. 2 huge guys drag Silas out to the courtyard, basically marching a dead man walking through the dark. He is staring blankly at the floor, totally missing her, watching him from the stairs. She takes in every pathetic step, feeling this sick combo of relief and horror. Then, the boss steps out of the shadows. He casually fixes his perfectly clean sleeve, which is such a terrifying flex of power. He turns around and locks those pitch-black eyes right onto hers. For 3 massive seconds, the room goes dead silent. He gives her a cold little head tilt, officially sealing their twisted deal. Here is your life lesson for today. When you choose to shake hands with the devil, you are signing up to carry his sins too. Let us break this crazy scene down. The basement door slams shut with a massive boom that literally shakes the stairs. It is basically the sound of a blood pact, locking away all that insane violence from the fancy house. She is stuck on the step, completely paralyzed. Her heart rate drops to this creepy ice-cold rhythm. Just by handing over one piece of paper, she basically deleted a guy from existence, but feels absolutely nothing. Silas tried to flatline the boss, and she was the one digging out the bullets. But now, she is rationalizing a full-blown execution without even blinking. This brings us to a dark life lesson. When you are shoved into a corner where survival is your only option, your brain will easily trade in your whole moral compass just to see the next sunrise. Jump ahead 24 hours later. The whole mansion goes dead quiet. The hitmen have vanished into thin air, even only for the leftovers and a note meant only for the boss's wife. Now pay attention to this detail. You see this sad, twisted little smile creeping onto her face. She is starting to embrace the exact same cage she tried so hard to break out of. Santino posts up in the kitchen, pouring heavy red wine and sliding the glass across the granite. They pull up tall chairs, sitting so close their knees are practically brushing. This intense, quiet vibe freaks her out way more than gunshots ever did. It gives us a real-life lesson. Sometimes the softest, quietest moments in our lives are the exact things that crack through our thickest armor. That red wine starts doing its magic, melting down the iron defenses of the Mafia king. By round 2, the crazy tension turns into this super fragile vibe. Santino completely ignores the literal blood still staining his hands. His deep voice echoes as he breaks down the mob meeting he just had. He leans right in and tells her that he stood in front of a bunch of killers and told them she was not some shiny trophy, but his personal choice. Boom, her heart basically catches fire. She squeezes that glass so hard her knuckles go pure white, just fighting to hide how badly she is shaking. It drops a heavy life lesson on us. No matter how much trauma you have survived, even the most damaged hearts are secretly starving to be genuinely chosen by someone. The shot zooms in to catch this absolute masterclass of a plot twist. The boss, a guy who usually looks like a stone statue, is suddenly dropping his guard completely. It is like watching a hitman hand over his gun. When she asks him about all the rival mobsters in that room, he just says he was never asking for their permission. A breathless laugh just rips right out of her. In return, the smallest hint of a smile tugs at his mouth. She latches onto that tiny smirk like it is a lifesaver in the ocean. And guys, here is a serious life lesson. When you have been starved for real affection, it is terrifyingly easy to mistake a guy simply putting down his weapon for actual, genuine love. Without another sound, their shadows merge as they head up those massive stairs together. You and I are about to unpack a literal masterclass in Mafia manipulation. These two are gliding up the grand staircase, totally synced in this crazy trauma bond. Santino leads her straight into the master bedroom. Desperate for warmth, she gets the huge stone fireplace roaring. Boom! Santino shuts the heavy door. The latch clicks loud, but instead of hearing a prison cell slam shut, this girl actually thinks he is locking the bad guys out. He leans against the wood, looking untouchable in the firelight. She stares into his dark eyes, totally convinced the ruthless Don is finally dropping his guard. But listen up, the simple life lesson here is that a trap is still a deadly trap, even when the predator lines it with velvet and calls it a safe house. Look at the insane tension right here. The suffocating weight of this mob boss staring her down is literally pressing against her chest. Santino steps away from the door, floorboards groaning under his heavy boots. Her ears are ringing so hard she cannot tell if it is his footsteps or her own heart going wild. He traps her completely with zero room to run. Then, he pulls the ultimate villain move. He raises a scarred hand, tracing her jawline, and rests his thumb on her shaking lips. He keeps his touch super gentle, totally faking a vibe of mutual consent. Guys, the real-life lesson here is terrifying. The absolute cruelest manipulation is when a toxic person pulls the string so well they make you firmly believe you were the one begging for the cage the entire time. Watch this absolute wreck unfold. She lifts her shaking face for a kiss, desperate to pretend she still has a choice in this mafia drama. Santino meets her halfway, faking this tiny hesitation like he is holding back. Total calculated trap. He slides his massive hand to the back of her neck. Boom. Prey locked down, dressed up as a spicy romance. She grips his shirt, feeling his heart pounding. She genuinely thinks that rapid heartbeat is true love. But here is the plot twist. It is not love. It is literally just the adrenaline of the predator finally catching his meal. His fake restraint completely shatters. The life lesson here is harsh but real. Never ever confuse a cozy little campfire with the massive toxic wildfire that is about to burn your entire life down to ash. The dominance in this scene is absolutely off the charts. Santino grabs her waist and literally yanks her into the air. Her feet are completely dangling. She is totally at the mercy of the city's most ruthless boss. Instead of fighting back, she throws her arms around his neck, hugging the exact dude ruining her life. He carries her to the bed, pinning her down with his terrifying, calculated gentleness. She looks into his cold eyes and somehow hallucinates that he is vulnerable. Total delusion. She thinks it is pure devotion, but he just sees a shiny new piece of property. The simple life lesson here hits super hard. When you are entirely starving for basic affection, you will literally paint a monster in the brightest, sweetest colors just to survive the dark. Boom, the mental trap just snapped shut. Santino whispers, asking if she is really sure about this. Are you kidding me? That is the ultimate toxic boss move, offering an open cage to a bird that cannot fly. Shaking like crazy, she tells him that after 8 months of hell, giving up is her only happy ending. Wild, right? He pulls her in tight, shedding her clothes with the ruthless speed of a hitman who already owns her soul. She shivers, genuinely thinking this mafia psycho is the only person who sees the real her. This brings up a massive life lesson. True destruction is not about getting physically beaten down by your enemies. It is when a manipulator brainwashes you into thinking you literally do not exist at all unless they are looking right at you. You and I need to pause and rip down this fake romance curtain. Look at the freezing reality here. Her shaking hands unbutton his black shirt, completely mistaking her massive trauma response for a cute, tender moment. She traces the fresh bandage on his shoulder. Santino presses her hand into his scars, selling the epic lie that they are just two damaged souls healing each other. Nope. His eyes scan her shoulders with the cold vibe of a mafia kingpin counting his cash. We have to learn this basic life lesson. People will absolutely blind themselves to the huge red flags in a toxic relationship just because the sweet lie feels way better than the painful truth. This is not a spicy romance. This is a terrifying masterclass in absolute control, perfectly disguised as love. This guy treats his entire body weight like a literal weapon to smash her last mental barrier, her racing heart and that burning tension. Those are just the invisible chains of her trauma locking her down. His voice drops. He loses the slick mob boss tone, gets totally raspy, and orders her to look at him. What a top-tier manipulation tactic. He makes her feel like the chosen one in a city of pawns. He traps her against the bed, making sure she realizes how impossible it is to run away. Then he buries his face in her neck with a broken groan, throwing her the tiniest fake crumb of weakness to justify her staying. Remember this vital life lesson. True love is supposed to give you wings and free you. If you are stuck in a gorgeous, diamond-studded cage, you are still just a prisoner. The pacing here is 100% run by his twisted playbook. His moves are so slow, forcing her panic gasps to sync up with his calm, hitman heartbeat. The firelight throws wild shadows while she rubs his tense back, totally convinced she is the only one who can fix this broken bad boy. He presses his forehead against hers and whispers that he is never letting her go. Guys, that is not a romantic vow. That is literally a mafia receipt of purchase. The second she whispers back that she will stay forever, her freedom turns to dust. Here is the toughest life lesson you will ever face. Surrendering your own voice does not buy you true love. It just buys you a quiet place to disappear. She is completely wiped off the map, swallowed alive by the exact villain she thought she saved. That climax was literally the final nail in the coffin of her freedom. She shuts her eyes tight as a crazy sensory overload short-circuits her nervous system. Santino goes rigid and collapses, perfectly dropping that icy, untouchable Dawn persona he kept up for 8 months. When the silence hits, the dying fire casts super dramatic shadows over the messy bed. He reaches out, casually brushing the sweat from her hair. She stares at his face and genuinely thinks this big bad mafia boss just lost a beautiful war against his own feelings. Yeah, right. The real-life lesson is that nobody actually wins when a human soul is hijacked. He basically sneaked through the back door of her mental fortress and locked her in his dungeon, all while handing her a shiny fake crown so she firmly believes she is the one winning. You and I need to pause the video right here and look at the disaster zone of her brain. The plot twist in her reality is wild. Santino pulls her tight against his chest, dropping his voice to a raspy whisper, promising he is never letting her leave. And what does he spies England Steve? She traces his sharp jawline, literally signing the contract for her emotional destruction. That massive mansion is dead silent like a tomb, completely cutting them off from society. She is laying there, listening to the heartbeat of the exact tyrant who ruined her life, and she actually smiles. She falls fast asleep, totally convinced she hit the safety jackpot. Listen, life teaches us a terrifying lesson here. Sometimes the biggest danger is not the monsters outside, but the cozy, warm fire burning right inside your own locked prison. Cut to the morning after. The sun blasts through the huge windows, shining onto the cold fireplace ash. Santino is gone, but the messy sheets are warm. She sits up, smelling the dark roast coffee wafting up from the Mafia kitchen. Then she looks down and realizes she is swimming in his giant white dress shirt. Wait, pause. She was completely asleep, and he dressed her unconscious body? That is a massive boundary violation. But her broken brain flips the script, turning this creepy move into an epic, romantic gesture of devotion. She gets butterflies, thinking about his scarred hands buttoning the collar. Guys, the life lesson is a brutal wake-up call. A severely damaged spirit will quickly take a pile of glaring red flags and sew them into a beautiful red carpet. Smiling like crazy, she heads downstairs, happily wearing her kidnapper's uniform. The creepy vibe of this crime syndicate mansion totally vanishes in her mind. She walks barefoot into the huge marble kitchen and spots Beck. This guy is literally a hollow-eyed hitman for the family. He is standing there in dead silence, munching on a stale pastry he stole from Taffy, another ruthless killer. Beck chews with the 1,000-yard stare of a guy who has dug way too many shallow graves. When she walks in, he just slowly raises the pastry at her. No words. To her completely fried brain, this terrifying mafia scene feels exactly like the cozy morning vibe of a brand new family. We have to remember this ultimate life lesson. Finding comfort in the dangerous shadows of violent people does not magically fix them and bring them into the light. It literally just drags you deeper into the pitch-black darkness. Guys, look at how deep Lena is into this fake reality. She is literally leaning against the kitchen counter, playfully scolding Beck for stealing food with a little hand-drawn heart on it. Beck, an absolute unit of a hitman, just deadpans that he would rather eat sugar than hear her complain. And she actually laughs. A real, genuine laugh. She is finding cozy vibes with literal mobsters who end lives before breakfast. Beck does not even crack a smile, though. Then the whole vibe just flatlines. The air gets incredibly heavy. Santino ghosts into the doorway, crossing those massive arms and leaning against the frame like he owns her soul. It is a wild scene. It teaches us a pretty simple lesson. The devil does not need to drag you to hell if he can just make you comfortable, sitting right there in the fire. You and I really need to break down this massive red flag together. Santino is just lurking in the shadows, staring at his own oversized shirt draped over her frame. She catches a tiny flicker of surprise on his face and totally fools herself into thinking he is charmed by this cute domestic vibe. She steps right up and hands him a hot mug. He deliberately lets his rough fingers brush against hers. It is a calculated shock meant to mess with her head. He takes a slow sip, keeping this intense eye contact. She thinks she has finally found peace, thinking this ruthless mafia boss actually cherishes her. But he is just admiring his favorite shiny new toy locked in his vault. It is a harsh truth to swallow, but true love is always supposed to be a mirror, never a cage. Beck just washes his hands under the cold tap and gives this quiet, knowing nod before slipping out. He totally gets the unwritten rule of the Mafia underground. The boss needs absolute isolation with his prize. So Santino and Lena are left alone in a kitchen that for 8 brutal months was basically a war zone of toxic silence. Now, bright sunlight is spilling over the marble, faking this whole fresh start aesthetic. They head out into the gardens, and Santino is hovering right by her side. His knuckles just barely graze hers, a masterclass in manipulation that keeps her heart racing. They stop on the deck, looking over the dark lake. But honestly, we have to remember a super important lesson here. The most dangerous traps in life are the ones painted to look exactly like open doors. Now the scene shifts to the heavy doors of his private study, and this is where the manipulation gets insane. She pushes the door open without knocking, wearing this hopeful smile. She believes she has earned a seat at the big table. Santino sits behind his massive desk, the literal nerve center of his crime ring. He cuts his phone call short the second he sees her, giving her a look of total respect. She drops into the leather chair and boldly says they need to talk. A warm glow hits her face because she actually feels like an equal partner now, not a hostage. But she is completely blind to the reality of the situation. It is a brutal wake-up call and a simple lesson for everyone. Never make the mistake of confusing the length of your leash for actual, genuine freedom. We zoom in crazy close because this is the absolute breaking point. She leans forward and quietly drops the name of her brother, Lazaro. For 8 agonizing months, she hid this kid in the shadows, draining secret funds to keep him off the radar of this mob boss. But right here, she hands his life over to Santino, totally confusing her emotional surrender with real trust. Watch the lighting in Santino's eyes. It takes him a fraction of a second to reply, but in that split second, the mask completely pure, unfiltered violence flashes across his face before he hides it. It is absolutely chilling to witness. It leaves us with a pretty heavy lesson today. Sometimes our desperate, lonely need to just blindly trust someone is exactly what hands them the loaded weapon. Stick with me here, because you and I are watching the exact moment a trauma bond is born. We see Lena trembling as she catches that tiny crack in the Don's fake persona. But Santino recovers so fast it freezes your blood, his deep voice dropping into a smooth, comforting purr. She frantically searches his jawline for the cruelty she knows is buried in there. But all she finds is that hypnotic stare he uses to trap his victims. She starts making excuses in her head for that flash of coldness, telling herself he is just a stressed leader watching his back. People will literally paint angel wings on just to survive a nightmare. It brings up a massive life lesson. Ignoring the screaming alarms of your own intuition is always the first step into disaster. The shot pulls back as Santino stands up and offers her this open, welcoming hand. When he pulls her up, his grip is perfectly calculated. The dim room light catches her wide eyes as she realizes these exact same hands, which literally crush rival Mafia bosses, are holding her wrist like it is made of glass. It is the ultimate villain move. He mixes terrifying violence with this fake gentleness to completely scramble her brain. They walk out through the massive foyer toward the water. The sunset, looking like a bruised purple sky over the Grasmarta, takes care of. It is honestly heartbreaking to watch someone fall for this, and it shows us a really profound lesson about people. The saddest thing in the world is a broken soul, confusing a tightening chokehold for a warm, protective hug. We get this wide shot of their silhouettes by the water, the huge lake swallowing the sunset. Out in the fog, you can see those massive iron gates topped with the Valerii crest, a giant stone hawk with pinned wings. 8 months ago, she showed up freezing in a plain white dress, looking at that creepy bird and knowing it was her prison. It was a literal fortress run by a boss who treated her like stolen goods. But honestly, a person can only take so much terror before their mind snaps. Sad music kicks in as she looks at those exact same gates now and actually feels a twisted sense of peace. It is wild how the brain works. It teaches us a tough lesson about survival. When we do not have the power to break the lock on our own cage, we protect our sanity by pretending we asked for the bars. The camera zooms right in on Lena's fingers as she nervously spins that heavy gold wedding band. For 8 whole months, spinning that ring was her anxious little habit. But watch closely, because her fingers suddenly stop. The ring finally fits perfectly. Her fight just completely drained out of her. Her shoulders slump as she fully gives in to her hostage situation. Santino just slides his massive fingers through hers, completely swallowing her hand. She feels the exact same palm that casually orders, mob hits now gently rubbing her knuckles like a devoted husband. It is a super dark picture of total mental defeat, and it leaves us with a stark warning for our own lives. The absolute deadliest poison will always be the one disguised to taste exactly like a cure. We follow her blank stare right back up to that stone hawk. The sky goes pitch black, but that monster statue does not scare her anymore. The creepy music fades into this tragic, soft lullaby. Her broken mind has completely rewritten the villain, turning her toxic warden into some kind of misunderstood hero. She rests her tired head on Santino's chest, totally convincing herself this is a romance she actually wanted. She thinks she is staying out of loyalty, totally blind to the heavy chains pulling her underwater. This is the Kingpin's ultimate flex, getting the victim to lock themselves inside the cell. It exposes a really dark truth about human nature that we all need to watch out for. We all have a terrifying habit of romanticizing the exact things that are slowly destroying us. But then, the whole fantasy completely shatters. The room lights up, and she is frantically pulling a hidden contract right out of his wall safe. The camera snaps to the black text. Line 1 has her name. Line 2 has one single, earth-shattering word, transfer. The silence is deafening, cut only by her panicked breathing. Just weeks ago, Santino paraded her around the Mafia bosses like a queen. But while she was sleeping next to him, this absolute monster was selling her off to Arsen Korvak to settle some old beef. The psychological whiplash is insane, guys. Trusting a toxic person always ends up burning you in the end. She drops against the cold wall, choking on the worst realization ever. To a ruthless player, you are never a human being. You are just chips pushed across a bloody poker table. The screen cuts to black right as she hits rock bottom. But let me tell you, this preview is nothing compared to the absolute carnage in her second file. You thought this was just a sad, heartbreak story? Nah. She is about to become a complete menace. The way she snaps is way too wild for the censors here to see the raw, unfiltered revenge and how she flips the script on the bosses pulling her strings. Hit the link in the pinned comment. I am obsessed with how she goes from a pawn to a nightmare for her enemies. If you are still here, I know you love a twisted payback story just as much as I do. And hey, remember this simple truth. When people push you into the dark, sometimes that is exactly where you finally learn how to see clearly. Catch you on the other side.